Hello everyone, my name is Alexia Raluca Turceniuc and I'm a master student from the Faculty of Economics and Business Administration at Babeș-Bolyai University, Cluj-Napoca, Romania. And to begin with, the title of my presentation is Human Capital and Climate Resilience, Fueling Sustainable Economic Growth in Sub-Saharan Africa. In this talk, I will explore how human capital, particularly health and other socio-economic factors, can drive economic growth in Sub-Saharan Africa while also enhancing the region's resilience to climate change. Before we dive into the details, let me outline the structure of my presentation. We'll begin by discussing the key concepts central to this study: human capital, inequalities, climate resilience, and economic growth. Next, I'll review the literature that has informed my research. Following that, I'll explain the data and methodology used in my analysis, and then I'll present my findings and discuss their implications. And also finally, I will conclude with some key takeaways and suggestions for future research. To set the stage for my study, I reviewed several pivotal works on human capital, health, and economic growth, with a focus especially on the Sub-Saharan African countries. These studies have been relevant for my research, and their objectives collectively emphasize health and social factors as drivers of economic development and underscore the growing influence of climate change. The core objectives of my study is to examine how human capital impacts economic growth across 58 Sub-Saharan African nations and to assess its potential in mitigating climate-related economic challenges. My hypothesis posits a direct positive relationship between health-related human capital, such as life expectancy and labor force participation, and the GDP per capita. Conversely, I expect unemployment and mortality rates to have an indirect or negative effect on the economic growth. And additionally, I propose that climate change amplifies these dynamics by adversely affecting health outcomes and also labor productivity, posing further challenges to sustainable development in the region. In order to investigate these relationships, I gathered data on key variables for the 58 Sub-Saharan African countries for the time frame 2020-2023. And here's a snapshot of the descriptive statistics. GDP per capita average is around 4,605 units, likely in USD, with a wide range from 420 to over 34,000, and this reflects the economic diversity. Regarding the labor force, this variable averages 7.6 million people per country, varying from 45,000 to 75 million. Life expectancy stands at 58.6 years on average, with a minimum 42 and a maximum of 77 years, indicating significant health disparities. The mortality rate likely per 1,000 live births averages 89, with substantial variation. Finally, the unemployment rate averages 9.3%, with fewer observations at 292, suggesting data limitations. These figures highlight the diverse economic and human capital landscape we are studying. To gain initial insights into variable relationships, I constructed correlation metrics using logarithmic transformations for GDP per capita, labor force, life expectancy to account for non-linear patterns. With a sample of 276 observations, we can see a moderate positive correlation between logarithmized GDP per capita and logarithmized life expectancy, suggesting that better health aligns with higher economic output. There is a strong negative correlation with mortality rate of 0.63306, indicating that higher mortality is linked to lower GDP per capita. Interestingly, logarithmized labor force shows a slight negative correlation of 0.1929, possibly reflecting larger labor forces in less developed economies. Unemployment has positive correlation of 0.5762, which may hint at measurement quirks in informal economies, And these correlations offer a starting point, but we must avoid assuming causation at this stage. For my analysis, I employed the ordinary least squares method with panel data to model the relationship between human capital and economic growth. The dependent variable is the natural logarithm of GDP per capita, which allows us to interpret results as percentage changes. The independent variables include the logarithm of labor force, of life expectancy, mortality rate, and unemployment rate in their original scales. The model is specified as we can see, we have GDP per capita as the endogenous variable and the other factors which are the independent variables. I conducted both simple regressions, examining each variable individually, and also multiple regression including all variables together to capture both isolated and combined effects. Now let's look at the results from the simple OLS regressions, which are highly significant. In the equation 1a, the coefficient for logarithmized labor force is minus 0.1585, significant at the 1% level, suggesting that a 1% increase in labor force is associated with a 0.1585% decrease in GDP per capita. And the reason may be due to the lower productivity in larger, less developed labor markets. In equation 2a, the logarithm life expectancy has a coefficient of 3.8740, also highly significant, indicating that a 1% increase in life expectancy boosts GDP per capita by 3.8740%, a strong testament to health's economic impact. In the third equation, the mortality rate is shown with a coefficient of minus 0.0129, significant also at the 1% threshold, meaning a 1 unit increase in mortality reduces the logarithm of GDP per capita by 0.0129 units. And finally, the results for unemployment from equation 4 are emphasizing a positive coefficient of 0.0567. The R-square values show that mortality explains 34.14% of the GDP variation, life expectancy 22.24%, labor force 7.26%, and also unemployment around 7.75%. Visually, these relationships come to life in two scatter plots. I illustrated the logarithmized GDP per capita as a function of logarithmized life expectancy, showing a clear positive trend. Countries with longer life expectancies tend to have higher economic output per person. The second plot maps the logarithmized GDP per capita against mortality rate, revealing a negative trend where higher mortality corresponds to lower GDP per capita. And these graphs reinforce our regression findings, providing an intuitive view of how health-related human capital influences economic performance in the Sub-Saharan Africa. Turning to the discussion, these results highlight nuanced dynamics in Sub-Saharan Africa. Life expectancy shows a direct positive relationship with GDP per capita, affirming health's role in boosting productivity. The unemployment rate's positive correlation with GDP per capita is intriguing. It may reflect that higher official unemployment rates occur in economies transitioning to formal sectors, which could increase output despite many individuals working informally or in subsistence agriculture. The labor force negative link with GDP per capita suggests that larger, often underqualified labor pools in low productivity sectors like agriculture drag down per capita income. Climate change compounds these issues, deteriorating health, raising mortality, and disrupting agriculture through extreme weather and environmental degradation, which in turn destabilizes jobs and forces migration, straining economic growth further. Finally, my study underscores that factors like life expectancy, unemployment, labor force participation, and mortality rates significantly shape economic growth in Sub-Saharan Africa. climate change exacerbates these challenges, worsening health outcomes, reducing labor productivity, and hitting key sectors like agriculture, thus increasing economic instability. However, reducing inequalities in human capital can foster inclusive development, lower poverty, and promote long-term stability. Strengthening human capital through targeted policies, improving healthcare, education, and climate adaptation can equip Sub-Saharan Africa to tackle climate-related challenges and achieve sustainable prosperity. And thank you for my presentation.